Hello and welcome back to the Jump Show. Plenty to get through this week, looking back at some notable performances from the last weekend and the past few days. And of course, we're going to be previewing all 3 days from the Cheltenham November meeting as well. Dan, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, very good, mate. Cheltenham at the weekend again. And somehow, I think I'm going the Saturday and you're going the Sunday. So we've managed to miss each other. That worked out quite nicely.
Again, yeah, for you, for you. Actually, you did that on purpose.
Absolutely.
And Jake, how are you?
Yeah, also good. And likewise, missing you on Sunday.
Avoided me like a bad smell.
Missing.
Let's start off with the review section anyway, guys. And we'll begin with the Grade 1 champion chase on the Down Royal, from Down Royal. If you don't mind, I'm going to take the reins here because this is the one I have a bit of an opinion on. Envoyalen is back, is basically what everyone said on Twitter. And I suppose it's not to be sniffed at the fact that he's won another Grade 1, confirming a Grade 1 win in all of his seasons to date. But I'm just going to need to see it again. I'm not completely convinced. I think the race fell apart behind. I think Galvin, he went off favourite. He disappointed. Maybe ground could be used as an excuse. Conflated, who is a proper Grade 1 horse in my eyes, he just drifted all day, went off 13-2. Clearly in need of a run in my eyes and one for later down the line. And then he beat Kenboy just over a length. And I think it's fair to say that he's not the force of old. I imagine Connections will be pretty happy with that performance, but maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but I just don't actually see him picking up another Grade 1 this season unless he finds a very, very flaky one. Jake, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Dan's comment on this podcast last week was, I just hope we see a sign of life from Envoyalen. So it was lovely to see that. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the form is up to that much. And as you said, we'll need to see it again to be fully behind him as being back to anywhere near his best. But by all accounts, he's going to the King George next, and it'll be interesting. But if they also send Allaho, then obviously it's going to be very hard for him, as we've said for Braban's game last week. So yeah, it's good to see a sign of life, but it's whether he's back or not is a different question.
Dan, would you agree? I suppose my comments from last week, I think I referred to as being washed. Obviously, that came to
and he goes and wins a Grade 1.
Yeah, that came to bite me on the ass pretty quickly.
Something below lay there. Yeah.
What did you make of Envoyalen?
No, I agree with what you said, mate. To be fair, I don't need to add much else to it. Great to see him back and winning, but I think he's far off what he used to be still.
Next up, we're going to look at a couple of the huge weight-carrying performances from the Nichols pair in Frodon and Grenadine. Dan, I'm just going to shoot straight back to you for your thoughts on Grenadine.
Well, to be fair, Nichols did give us the clue. Said he was
much more forward than last year, and he was duly right. I mean, I guess if we're learning anything at this stage, it's just when Paul Nichols says one of his horses is forward and ready to go at the start of the season, he generally doesn't miss. I'd say you'd probably have to look at the race and say it fell apart a bit in behind. It's impressive for a horse to carry 168 in a handicap, but it's third time lucky, kind of threw the toys out the pram after a mistake. Warlord was never in it, never travelling at all, really, at any stage, and you could tell he was beat a long way out. Then Dolos staying into second to make it a 1-2 for the stable, obviously been around a long time, was well handicapped in old form, but you'd probably be disappointed some of the others couldn't progress past him. But good performance, sets him up nicely for the Tingle Creek, and clearly a horse who's may still be improving, and well, at Sandown he'll have a great chance.
I was going to say I'm going to get it in there early. Dolos for that race in February, I believe, at Sandown didn't run completely bad. I know he's beaten 7 lengths, obviously getting quite a bit of weight, but everything's going to be targeting back to that. I just think this really highlights how bad the 2-mile novice chasers were, especially in Britain last season. Hence why Grenadine was able to win off such a lofty weight. Jake, what did you think of the performance?
Yeah, 2 great performances. I was actually there at Exeter on Friday. Yeah, he just jumped very well, traveled very well, and just beat them easily. As we said, Warlord just couldn't handle the pace, get him up to 2.5 miles, pleased Mr. Tizard. And third time lucky, as I said to you before, when you made your case, I just don't like the horse at all. Travelled into it so menacingly, like he was going to go on and do something, and then just went out like a light. Like, I just don't see how anyone can trust that horse anymore.
Yeah, and I hit a fence and just stopped pretty quickly. We'll move on to Frodon quickly. Kevin Blake has been harping on about the sort of questionable handicapping with this horse. He was obviously a beneficiary of the new handicapping system. Me and Dan both hopped on the obvious, and he landed a bit of a gamble at 4-1 into 9-4. He's been raised to a mark of 164. It seems fair. I don't imagine they'll be going into handicaps. I believe the King George is next on the list for him anyway. Just a quick word on his performance, Jake.
Yeah, again, we have fair play. Well done to you lads for getting it. I'm glad I avoided the race completely because Captain Or just drifted all day. So
You knew
know what was happening there.
He ran pretty well, though.
Yeah. He did run
Finished
well.
third.
Yeah, he will pick up a race at some point this season.
Just good
Maybe
luck
back
guessing
at
which one it will be.
Exactly. Yeah, it's anyone's guess.
Took the words out of my mouth down there.
Yeah, but Frodon did exactly what we said he could do, didn't he? Just jumped them all silly. No one could actually, live with that type. But that level of horse couldn't live with it. I don't think it mattered what weight he carried. You just couldn't live with his jumping. So yeah, fair play to Nichols. He's done it twice with 2 days in a row with 2 good horses.
Dan, any more to add on that?
No, just great to be on him, to be fair.
Not normally been a backer of him when he's won, so it made a nice change to actually cheer him home for a change.
We'll look at just a few more performances. We'll start with Time Hill. He's a pretty accurate jumper, considering it's his first time over fences. He's been tipped for the RSA by a popular YouTube series. But Dan, I'm pretty sure you're of the belief that this horse might struggle in such a race.
Popular YouTube series, name redacted. They don't want any of our.
I don't want to give them any.
No promotion. Look, it was a satisfactory chase, Dave. You'd say for a horse who spent a long time over hurdles. I thought he jumped pretty nicely, safe. I don't think you'll be seeing him gain lengths at fences, unlike maybe some others he might encounter in his division later on. Ultimately, the race is fairly middling. Flash Colons has been a bit of a head case for a while. Pressure Luck ran no race whatsoever, so what he beat is questionable. Look, we know he's a very good horse based on his time over hurdles. The British side of this division looks fairly weak. Obviously, Ballygriffin Cottage, maybe, but I'd say he's probably one for even further and deeper ground conditions. It was okay, but I think come the big festivals, it would be disappointing if there weren't one or two younger, more progressive and scopier types that could have his measure.
Going to have a quick, just a few words on American Mike. He obviously made his hurdling debut at Down Royal. He was sent off 1-6 favourite. He won by 6 lengths. I don't think we learned much about him, in truth. I think you'll most probably see the best of him later on this season, as you'd hope, over a shorter distance. And I also think some better ground will suit him as well. I thought that was quite testing at Down Royal, and judging off his bumper form, that sort of ground wouldn't have suited him. Jake, you took a look at Mighty Potter, another short price winner for Gordon Elliott at the meeting. What did you make of his performance?
I think unconvincing is probably the best word for it. He put down at the first, he pulled hard, wandered into the second. There was just no jump where he really convinced. He did put in a couple where he was fine, but I guess you could say the further the race went on, the better he got in that regard. Because the last 2 fences where he really needed to jump because the other horses were starting to close on him, he actually did produce a good jump. But yeah, I've heard there's been some rogue shouts, isn't there, for him up for the Arkle and stuff like that. He's now 12-1 for the Arkle. I think that's absolutely disgraceful, really.
How he was cut for any race after that, I'm really
not
yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
What's the standard for anti-post novice chasers? They have to be able to climb over a fence. I just don't understand. What can you see that would make them drift? If they win but clamber over, surely they can't be a shorter price. It's mind-boggling to me. But there you go.
In the case of John Bond, you just have to run up a hill and then you get paid out. So
yeah.
Yes, yeah, very good. Yeah.
Pot 3 fences and that's it. Jake, I hope you remembered. I was going to chuck to you. You said you had a small little eye catcher for viewers. I think it was a pretty obvious one myself, but take it away.
Yeah, it's very, very obvious. I mentioned it in last week's podcast when I was talking about Geskilly. I said if the ground got very testing, then he would be one who would run well. And it duly did get fairly testing, and he did run well. Obviously, only beating a neck. I think the Beecher is absolutely made for him. He's shown that he jumps those fences perfectly. Back up to 3 miles and a furlong. I think the Beecher is be absolutely perfect for him. He's only put up £4, so you can currently get on him at 12-1 for that race, which obviously it's a way off, but I think that's a decent bet.
All right, it's now time for some tipping. We're going to try and cover out as many races possible, and in as much detail as possible as well. But quite a few to get through. We'll start off with Friday's action, where we're going to look at the 145, a 2-mile handicap chase. And Dan, I'll head to you.
Yeah, to be honest, the whole Friday as a whole, I haven't
really
been
enamoured with, and from a punting perspective, obviously it's a trappy little races. I think I couldn't really be backing the Glancing Queen at such a short price, carrying 12 stone back over 2 miles against the boys. I know I was keen on her for a plate, and she was a bit disappointing, but she's even up £4 from that in a race where there are a few with potential. I thought Fugitive maybe was a decent price, a double figures. I think this very sets up nicely for an each way angle into it, given the field size, and I think Fugitive's fairly solid for a resurgent yard. But look, I'm not going to lie, it's not a day I'm probably going to maybe have any bets, to be honest.
Jake, any strong opinions on this one?
It wouldn't be my strongest opinion of the weekend, but I do think that Grey Diamond's got a good chance. Like Dan, I would take on the Glancing Queen. Alan King said she's just about ready for her reappearance because she had a little hold up. So that doesn't really inspire confidence, does it, when she's carrying 12 stone against the boys? So yeah, I'd be happy to take her on. Grey Diamond was the one that I kind of came down on. He was favourite for a race at Wincanton back in February, I think it was, off this mark of 131. And he was about to go and win the race, and then at the last he just slid on landing and completely went to a halt. He managed to stay on his feet somehow and complete the race in last. But yeah, I thought that proves that he can win off this type of mark. He's previously finished 5th in a red realm off 1 through 4. He was 3rd, promoted to 2nd in the listed handicap chase at Ascot on reappearance last season as well. So off 1 through 1, I think he'll go well. The danger, I would say, is Amarillo Sky. He ran well in the Grand Annual, and he's shown that he's a good horse over 2 miles. But I don't think he runs well fresh. Last season he needed 2 runs before he really got going. So yeah, I was happy to go against him. And then Monsieur Lecoq is also, I thought he wanted it softer than this. So yeah, Grey Diamond for me.
Next up is the 3:30 Ballymore Novices Hurdle, won by Blazing Cow last year. And this year, Willie Mullins sends Hubrisco. He wouldn't be known for sending horses to this race. Do you see that as a bit of a tip in itself, Jake?
Yeah, I really like Hubrisco here. I think it's a decent race, but I think it looks like a race that's full of like proper 3-mile boats and horses that are going to be improving for going up in trip. So you've got like Hermes Allen, who has apparently flattered the deceive at home. That they weren't expecting much of him. That's why they sent to Stratford first time out. You've got Collector's Item and We've All Been Caught that ran in a point to point. You've got Music Drive, who just looked incredibly slow when we saw him in October. Quid Pro Quo probably not up to this level, and then Getaway Drumley again looks like a point recruit that could easily be better over 3 miles. So I think Hubrisco is the only one who's actually shown proper pace in this. So considering none of those horses that I think are 3-milers are going to set an amazing gallop, I think he'd just be able to track in behind the leader, even make the running if he needs to, and then try and quicken off a bit rather than make it a speed test rather than a stamina test. He's won over 2 miles a couple of times, and when he won his maiden, he actually beat Royal Romeo, who won his next start, and Fenner's Cross, who won the maiden hurdle last month here at Cheltenham. And Fenner's Cross is actually running the Supreme Trot on the Sunday as well. So the form's looking good. He was 3rd behind Champ Kylie and Brazil in Grade 3 on his last start over 2 miles, where he looked like he needed 2.5 again. The ground looks perfect for him. So yeah, I think with Paul Town and over to ride, as you said, potentially a tip in itself.
Dan, I know you said you didn't have too much time to look at Friday's action, but would you have any opinions on this race at all?
Yeah, I do like Hubrisco.
Yeah, I think he's by far the most likely winner. I think this price is now getting to a point that reflects his chance. If I can nick 5 to 2 on the day, that'll probably be the price that would tempt me in. I missed the early ones. I hope Collector's Item runs well for my winless series. I just thought he was very green and very inexperienced looking on his hurdles debut. Will need to jump a hell of a lot slicker than he did there, but ultimately the step up in trip is going to help him. But I'd be somewhat surprised if he's able to beat Hubrisco here based on what he's done. But I'm glad he's now shorter than We've All Been Caught, because when We've All Been Caught was joint favourite and Collector's Item was 14 to 1, that was a insult.
We'll move on to Saturday's action now, and we'll start off with the 145, the Arkle Trial. We've seen some good winners of this race in recent years. Obviously, 3rd time lucky won it last year, Pig. Eldorado, Allen has won it. Put the Kettle On has won it. A few others as well. This looks like a really hot race to me. I think rather than a punting race, it would be just more of an informative, watching race. But Monmoral heads the market. He's been a drifter. Tommy's Oscar's also in there here. Banbridge drops in trip. He's interesting. And Pentland Hills, obviously a previous Triumph Hurdle winner. Dan, would you have any strong opinions on this one at all?
Yeah, just going back to look at the market again.
Yeah, so it's Monmouth like 2-1, 9-4. Yeah, it's a very interesting race. As you say, there's a lot of different angles coming into this, as you've already kind of touched on. Honestly, the kind of more I looked at it, this is not a race I'd be going in heavily, but I kind of kept going back to Pentland Hills, just at the prices. I thought he was perhaps more appealing than Monmouth would be at 2-1. Like, I mean, if you look at what they achieved in their juvenile seasons, you pretty much achieved very similar things. Obviously, Pentland Hills won the Triumph and then won at Aintree. Monmouth just won at Aintree. Both had an official rating 153 after the juvenile season. RPRs are very similar as well. And when you look back in hindsight, and hindsight is a glorious thing, he actually didn't do too badly in that first season in open company. Like, he had a couple of close-up performances. I know he was very frustrating because he travelled so well a couple of times and didn't quite get over the line. But in hindsight, he still looked to be a very decent horse, considering he's a 4-year-old going into his 4/5-year-old season. And obviously, unlike some of these, namely Monmouth, he's had a spin on the flat, so we know he's fit. Obviously, we know he was fit and ready to go on his chase debut when he had that walkover. I guess a lot of talk has been about Paul Nicholls' form and how good he is, but Nicky Henderson is now really starting to roll as well. I think he's had 7 winners from 15 runners since the start of the month. Like, he's starting to come into his own, as we know he's a bit later progressing than Paul Nicholls would be, but he's getting there. We know this ground suits. I thought just at 6-1 compared to Monmouth 2-1, like that would be where my tentative selection would go.
6-1 does seem rather big, actually. Jake, who do you fancy here?
Yeah, I'd say the horse I'm most excited to see is obviously Monmouth. He was, Dan's horse to forget last season. I completely wholeheartedly agree with that. He ran some decent races in open company, in graded races. He was always well packed, wasn't he? Like, despite never actually coming that close to winning. But whether you want to get stuck into him at 2-1 in a race like this, probably not. I don't tend to like novices starting their chase careers at Cheltenham that much. I think there's much easier tracks, to start off at. So I'd be happy to just leave out the race in terms of a betting point of view. But there are obviously very interesting horses. Tommy's Oscar, it's very interesting with him because he was supposed to run at Carlisle on Monday in an intermediate chase, but that got abandoned. So they're coming here. But previously, Ian Hamilton said that he didn't really like Cheltenham at all when they came for the Champion Hurdle. He said that obviously the hustle and the bustle of the festival really didn't help him either. And I'd probably say November Meeting Saturday is the most highly attended day other than the festival. So I don't see how that's going to help him much. But he obviously jumped very well on his chase debut. And then Banbridge is also the other interesting one. Strange, I think it's very strange they're running over 2 miles. It just screams handicaps, doesn't it, really? But he jumped very well on his chase debut last month, over 2.5 miles. So he jumps. It's just, I think 2 miles would be too sharp for him.
Next up is the 240, the Paddy Power Gold Cup, the feature race on the day as well. I'm going to keep this simple for all there are some risks attached with this horse, and that's Galore. His price has come in a little bit in recent days, but he ran a really eye-catching race in that old Rowan Cup behind Hitman and Riders on the Storm. He's only beaten just over a length. Hitman, obviously, potentially a Grade 1 horse. Riders on the Storm was a graded horse back in the day and just came down to the right sort of mark for him. That was Galore's first run in like 600 odd days. So obviously there's the bounce factor that you have to take into consideration, which is a bit of a concern. But he is well handicapped off that form, and there's only a 6-year-old running for a yard going well. So I would most probably play that as a muggy each way bet for me. Dan, who's your pick for the Paddy Power?
First things first, this is not a great race by this race's standard whatsoever.
And I think as a result, it's incredibly tricky. Like, I spent so much time on this race just trying to find something that really appealed to me. And to be honest, I just didn't. Like, the one I thought had the most upside is Il Ridotto. I think he showed flashes of what he can do last season, that Newbury win being the highlight. And to be fair, that race has worked out incredibly well. And he did have excuses thereafter, mainly being turned out too quickly in the Henry VIII, then heavy ground at Lingfield and in the Grand Annual, and then he was too keen in the small field at Ayr. So the one time he's had a truly run, good ground handicap, he's absolutely bolted up in it. And again, I guess what probably just prompted me to side of him was the infamous line, as I referred to earlier. Paul Nicholls was interviewed earlier today, and he said he's ready to run for his life again. And I just can't ignore that because it keeps working this season. It keeps working. And he's always bang on with this. I think this may be the toughest task of the horses he's had ready thus far. But considering he's only a 5-year-old, and it would be some effort for a 5-year-old to win. But in a race where I think you can have question marks over many and Others are fairly exposed. I thought he probably had more upside than most, and he's still a reasonable enough price.
Jake, who's your pick for this race?
Yeah, I had a good look at Il Ridoto. He was definitely my second shout, actually. But the thing that put me off him is he really reminds me of Magic Saint. So obviously Magic Saint was a horse who ran well over 2 miles, would win his races over, off his handicap mark that he could win off. But then when he ran in the Paddy Power, I think, and he looked like he travelled really well, and he just faded out in the closing stages. I think that could be an issue here with Il Ridoto. I know you said he was keen down at Air, but he did fade out in the final furlong and a half to finish third in the end.
Season,
got beaten
big
by
field. Big field will settle him much better.
Yeah, that's fair. But that would
finishes
just
very strongly.
worry us all. Yeah, and he's had a wind up as well, which obviously should help with that. But yeah, that was the only thing that put me off. And like you, Willow, I landed on Galore. I thought that run at Aintree the other day was brilliant because he was actually last starting for home, and then he managed to stay on through the whole field to finish third. He was only beating a length and a half, and closing at the line. That should have him absolutely spot on for his second attempt off the same mark of 142. Yeah, I think he's got a great chance.
We'll move on.
I think he actually will drift on the day as well. Sorry, just to add, because I think most people that would have backed, most people that wanted to back him have probably already backed him anti-post. I think he will be something like 13-2 that he's currently drifted out to. I think he could get to maybe 7, hopefully 8, but I think he could get to 7-1.
We'll move on to the 3 mile hurdle, the 255. Jake, I'll head back to you. Who's your pick here?
Yeah, it's a tricky looking race, but we've managed to come down on 3 different horses, which is quite an achievement from us. The one I've come down on is On the Blind Side. Now, he's not the missed in the market. I think he opened up about 14s. He's now into 9s. But he does have a great chance based upon he won this race 2 years ago off a mark of 145. He beat none other than Mrs. Milner that day by neck. Mrs. Milner obviously went on to win the Potemps that season. And not only that, though, last season he also ran well fresh. He was second in the Grade 2 long walk hurdle at Newbury, where he was just behind a race fit Thomas Darby, who's rated 153. He's now back down to a mark of
Thomas Darby, obviously. Take a pure line through that. That's definitely solid form.
He's now back down to a mark of 144 after some questionable efforts. I think obviously the main angle here is he runs well fresh. It's kind of the only angle you've got. But and also Nicky Henderson's in great form, as Dan mentioned earlier. He's 8 from 19, which is 42% strike rate at the minute. So in a race that I think looks terrible, I think at 9-1 he's a fair each way chance.
For very obvious reasons, I'm going for paddle your own canoe. A couple of weeks ago now, we made a video basically talking about trainers, and we were asked to put up a rogue shout for trainers. And I said that I thought paddle your own canoe could win a race. Admittedly, I believe I said I think he could win a race of offences.
Yeah, you said marathon handicap chase.
I believe I was chatting with you, Jake, or we were having a chat before a podcast the other week, and you said that the Scoutmans thought he just didn't like fences. So with that in mind, he's been dropped £10 since joining the Scoutmans, and I thought there's a chance he could run really well here. Or maybe I've just got very poor logic and it's showing blind loyalty. Most probably the latter. But I effectively can't leave this horse unbacked after what I said, and it's going to be a momentous occasion for the podcast when he runs home a very easy winner. Dan, who do you fancy here?
I mean, we'll complete the rogue shouts then, I guess, because you might laugh at me for this one as well. I just thought saw him at 20-1 and thought, looking at this race, it's not a good race at all. Like Jatalui is massive at 20-1. I'm not having anything said about it. And I know you're going to look at him and think, oh, yep, David Maxwell's riding. That's immediately why he's 20-1. Admittedly, that is a slight issue, as is the Hobbs form. But to be fair, the yard is starting to churn out some winners. They had a double Exeter on Monday. They had a winner at Taunton today as well. And to say, I don't think this is a great race. And if you go back to Jatalui's hurdle form, and he hasn't run over hurdles for a while, like he's actually really well handicapped. Like he beat West Cork in a novice hurdle. Then he won a handicap over 2 mile 5 at this meeting 3 years ago for a pound lower, comfortably as well, like very comfortably. Then he was second to third wind, very close second to third wind off an £8 high mark that he raced off today at Wincanton. That's when third wind was off 137. He then went on to win a grade 2 and won last year's Potemps off 141. And then he Jatterley finished like 8th in the attempts off 148. That was his last run over hurdles. He went pointing and hunter chasing, but fundamentally, I don't think he ever really took to fences. He had chase experience from France, but he was never a natural over his fences over here, from based on what we saw. And despite that, he actually ran some nice races. Like, he was second to Wishing and Hoping, who then on his next start bolted up in an entry handicap and ended up rated in the mid 140s. So he now all of a sudden finds himself off £10 lower than when he was last running over hurdles. In that time, David Maxwell's improved massively as a jockey. Whatever you want to say about him, he's definitely better than he was 3 years ago. Philip Hobbs won this race last year with Sporting John, who was also reverting from fences to hurdles. And this is only going to be his 8th start over hurdles in Britain. Like, he may be one of the older in the field, but he's still relatively unexposed over hurdles at staying trips. Good ground suits. I just thought 20-1 in the race is pretty weak was a massive price.
Long-term viewers just know that Dan knows how to polish a turd really, really well.
They know. They've been around. They've seen them all.
We'll move on to Sunday's racing now, and we're going to start off with the Schlur Chase. Last year's winner, Nube Negra, tackles last season's Arca winner, Edwardstone. I'm not too sure at this, boys. If I'm honest with you, it's a bit of a flip of a coin job, if you ask me. Dan, I'm going to head back to you. Who do you fancy here?
Not a betting race by any stretch. It's an interesting one. Obviously, we know Nube Negra's deal effectively. These are his conditions. I guess you would argue that maybe he was poor at Sandown in the celebration when also on good ground and fresh last time out. Maybe he's just more effective at Cheltenham, which seems fairly likely. Obviously won this race last year, but that race is, let's just say, abysmal. Politolog was second, who retired 1 run later after being down the field in the Champion Chase. Then Put the Kettle On was third. I think she was beaten and 69 lengths combined on the next 2 starts and then retired. And then Rouge Vif was fourth. And I think he's only beat 1 horse that completed in his last 4 starts. And is now back at Harry Whittington's yard. So I don't, if literally a race couldn't work out any worse than the last year's Schlur. I guess in a battle, and you'd much prefer Edwardstone, and that's kind of how I saw it. Look, ultimately, it's a weak division last year of novices. We know that. No one's going to claim it was the vintage Arca either, but he did it nicely. Had to come up with some problems in traffic as well. I don't think there's any shame in going down at Aintree the way he did to a later developing novice. That happens fairly frequently. He had a long season by then as well.
Hard season, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and it hardly ran a stinker either, did he? It was a solid enough race. It wasn't his Arkle form, but it was decent. Obviously gets £3 from Nube Negra here. I'm not sure that's a huge factor, to be honest. But I think if they're coming, they turn into the straight neck and neck, is probably can easily see Nube Negra looking to go better. But once they get over the last, up that hill, I don't think anyone would want Nube Negra in the battle over Edwardstone. Edwardstone's a far more resolute horse if that situation comes up. Will I back him? No. But I think he's the most likely winner.
I'm going to have a marginal vote for Nube Negra, mainly because I just really dislike Edwardstone. He did me dirty when winning last year's Arca. I was just so convinced he was going to get walloped. He put me right in my place. You're seeing viewers are seeing a real running theme here.
Yeah, I mean, I was against him too, but
I can adjust to recent evidence. Willow's just like back. He's still like adamant Paddle Your Own Canoe's going to win. Like he just.
I'm still adamant at the top
recent
would have beaten
evidence.
Honeysuckle in that track.
Oh,
no, we're not going to go down there.
No, please don't.
But it is hard to avoid Nube Negra's. Firstly, his record around Cheltenham's really good. You have to remember he did run in the Champion Chase and finish second, albeit you can then pick holes in that Champion Chase. And then secondly, his record fresh is really good as well. He's the bigger price of the two. I think feasibly you could switch around in the market and people wouldn't complain. So happy to take Nube Negra at 6-4. Jake, who do you fancy here?
Yeah, I'll just keep it simple. I agree with everything Dan said. Really, the race last year is absolutely terrible for Nube Negra. So if you're using that as a piece of form for him, then I don't think you can really say much for it. So yeah, I think Edwardstone would be the one. Editor de Jeet's probably not without a chance, considering he actually ran fairly well in that handicap, but he wasn't given a hard time, shall we say? So if that was a preparation for this, then he should go well. But if they've got future targets in mind, then obviously then he's not going to get
nearly. Is he not declared for the
Paddy Power as well?
He might be doubly declared, yeah.
Yeah, so that'd be interesting.
Not running. Yeah, either way, Edwardstone would be the one for me.
Next up is the 220, the 3 mile free furlong handicap chase. This is just not my bag at all. So Jake, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Yeah, I found it difficult to nail down the selection. Obviously, we're recording this on Thursday, so we don't actually have Sunday decks yet. But Musical Slave's obviously the most interesting of these, having finished second to Hewick in the Bet365 Gold Cup on his last start. Obviously, Hewick's now rated 167, so 137 for Musical Slave doesn't look the worst mark in the world. I thought that Fantastic Cast would run well off the mark of 142. He won off 140 last season at Lingfield. Perhaps he would want it a little bit softer than this, but I think, the Twist and David Yard are able to, they do target these types of handicap chases around Cheltenham, so I think he'll run well. And one to perhaps keep in the notebook, maybe not for this weekend, but Trucker's Lodge, I think, is back ready to win a race again now. He's down to a mark of 145, which is a lot more realistic than what he's been running off lately. And last season, he was third off 147 at Ascot in a listed race. So I think he'll win a race at some point, but I think he wants softer ground than this. So yeah, I don't really have a bet yet, to be honest, but some interesting horses, that's for sure.
Dan, any fancies here at all?
No, not really. Not without Dex. I echo the comment on Trucker's Lodge. I mean, surely they should be able to sneak him in that veteran series. He'd hack up, wouldn't he?
Yeah,
he would absolutely bolt up. But yeah, no, without Dex, this race is a bit of a minefield. Obviously, Fantastic Ass was an emotional journey last year for me, and ultimately, like, he shaped pretty well in that Ultima. He ran a good race. I think you can forgive him the Scottish National, but I mean, he's 7-2 like, currently without Dex. I mean, that's short enough based on not knowing what's going to turn up, and he isn't exactly screaming really well handicapped. So yeah, I'm not a race I'm playing at the minute.
The last race we're going to be looking at is the Greatwood Hurdle, the 255. Where the man Emmett Mullins has the favourite. Bookie's obviously ducking for cover. 1,000 Tears, 300 days off the track over obstacles. He's had a few spins over the flat. He could just be a disgusting plot job for Emmett Mullins, couldn't he? I'm not interested in this at all. Dan, the floor is yours.
I think he's just defensively priced at this stage.
I think he probably came for early money, and then all of a sudden they're all terrified. We've seen this script before. I couldn't touch him personally. I think if he was trained by anyone else, like, he's double figures easily. He's not really shown anything to suggest he should be favoured for a Greatwood. Daz Lad, obviously good in October, but I mean, that wasn't a great race either, was it really? Like, Effinock Fizz was second. She's 20 pounds inferior over fences and was running off her hurdles mark. And then the rest pretty much didn't run a race or weren't even trying, like Edda to the Jeet. So I don't think you necessarily take that as to be red hot form. Obviously, Willie Mullins is always to be respected, but he's short enough for me as well. Sonagino's had 2 very soft leads at Chepstow. This is a completely different ball game, for as much as I do love the horse for being on my winless ones to watch series. But I would not back him in a million years at the price he is. If he ran in the race, I'd have Gin Coco. But it seems like he's going to go to the Supreme Trial, where I'll back him there instead. Other than that, I was kind of scratching my head a bit, to be honest. So yeah, it may sound like a broken record, but not a race as it stands, based on the knowledge that Gin Coco might not run, that I'm currently looking to back anything in.
Jake, any fancies here at all?
Well, firstly on the favourite, I think it's just one that you've got to leave now. He's like 4-1 favourite. He's got absolutely zero form whatsoever. We know the connections, and as Dan said, not only if he was trained by someone else, he'd be a double figure price, but he wouldn't even have been given a mark of 129, I don't think, unless he was trained if he was trained by anyone else. So yeah, I've just, if it wins, then so be it. It's just one of those ones where you just got to leave it if you're not already on at a nice price. But then again, if you are, then you've probably had some kind of inside information, because I don't really know how you pick it out. Dad's Lad actually beat him by 6.5 lengths in a flat race at Galway in July, which says something about the horse. I did think it was interesting off 135, off 128, so £7 lower than his mark that he won over fences last month. And potentially, like, I'll be watching the market to see if he stays around the same kind of price that he is now, 11-2. If so, then I'll probably have a bet, because I really do think that Willie Mullins is actually going to hopefully try and go for the UK Trainers Championship this season. Obviously, he picked up that 30k race last month with Dad's Lad. He's got Hibrisco on the Friday. And he's got plenty of entries in the upcoming races, like the Tingle Creek. He wants to have a go at that. The King George, he wants to have a go at that. So I think he really could have a good go at the UK Trainers Championship. The other one I liked in this race, though, was Severance. He ran in the World Champion Hurdle at Foss last month. and he was £4 out the handicap that day. And Keelan Woods also carried £2 overweight, so he's essentially £6 out of the weights, which is obviously a lot. But he ran a very good race to finish only 2.25 lengths behind Efanok Fizz. He's back down to mark of 129 now. And I think that he could run well, but he could be vulnerable, obviously, to something that's better treated than him because he's been around for a while now.
Okay, so it's time for the anything else section across all 3 days. And Jake, I'll head to you.
Yeah, I've kept it quite short this week, just because obviously we had a lot of races to go through. So Friday in the 110, the opening race, I've got 2 that I'm going to Dutch here. So you've got Hector Javalex, who was ran okay in the Persian War last month, but I think off of 123, he looks very well treated. And Charlie Longson won this race a couple of seasons ago with Castle Robin, who was a very similar type. And I'll also Dutch that with Irish raider Alvaro off 119. I'd suggest you go check out his Irish form. It looks very good. So I think he's been nicely well treated. And then on Saturday in the 118 at Wetherby, Lucinda Russell's got There Is No Doubt. He's rated 121 now, which is £2 lower than when he ran really well over course and distance last season. She's been in great form this week. So yeah, that's my 2 bets. I think he's around 12 to 1 on the opening prices. I'd imagine that'll be shorter on the day, but that looks like a decent bet.
And Dan, anything else for you?
Yeah, so I've got a couple noted down. So
On Saturday, the 153 at Wetherby, Defi Sacra for Richard Hobson. Now, it's pretty well documented they had their issues last season. It's the only 3 winners in total, 2 of those from one horse. He's already had 2 winners this season in the just past couple of weeks, and Lord de Manil ran an absolute stormer the other day behind Lamilos. So it's seemingly that they're back in form, and that augurs well for Defi Sacra, who, like many of his, struggled last season. But as such, he's dropped £10 for 3 runs, £8 below his last winning mark. Season before, he had been running consistently well off marks in the high 120s, and now he's down to a mark 117. Brian Hughes booked 2 mile 4 furlongs on good ground, all his ideal conditions, and he's opened up at 11 to 1 in a fairly open race. So I'll be fairly keen on his chances. And then one who isn't declared yet because it's Sunday, but 240 at Fontwell, History Bear for Tom Simmons, who I guess like Richard Hobson, a yard who did not have a great season last year, but again, signs of life recently. Kellehen, who won pretty nicely the other day to kind of kickstart their season. And you look at History Bear's form, it actually stacks up pretty well. Both his hurdle wins have come at Fontwell in the UK, the second of which came on his seasonal reappearance. And first time out after a break the season before, he went very close behind Hudson de Grugy, giving him £6, and he's now rated 133, which makes the mark 128 look very, very solid. And you've got to bear in mind as well, this is a horse who went off 15 to 2 for an Imperial Cup. So clearly, there's plenty of potential there. I think it's going to be softish ground at Fontwell, which is going to suit. It's a race that Tom Simmons actually won a couple of years ago with Song for Someone. So I think he's got a few entries at that meeting. So he seems to target it as well. Prices aren't available yet. I'd say if you can get, depending on field size, a 9-2, 5-1, something like that, he would be a nice bet.
All right, that's just about going to wrap up the podcast. Everyone can breathe. We fit a lot of information into this podcast, boys. So well done for that. Fingers crossed with plenty of winners. I don't know if you boys have anything more to add on this at all.
Nope.
Be lucky.
No.
Let's save their time.
Be lucky. All right, guys, if you did like the video, please make sure to drop a like and a comment. If you haven't already, do subscribe, join the Telegram, follow us on Twitter, and we'll catch you all next week for another video.
That was great timing.
That's free too.